Hey guys, welcome back. So this is our World History SOL8 lecture series, and we're going to be talking about the legacy of Napoleon. Remember Napoleon? We talked about him. Okay, we're going to talk about the Congress of Vienna, essentially a meeting of European states to try to maintain a lasting peace. And we mentioned this a little bit already. We're going to talk about the rise of nationalism and what that's going to do. And we kind of already saw a little bit of this when we talked about our Latin American revolutions. We saw it in France in the French Revolution. Well, we're going to see it start to spread across Europe. Nationalism is going to be part of the reason we see the unification of Italy and the unification of Germany. All right, so let's take a look. So Napoleon's legacy and the legacy of the Congress of Vienna. Remember, Napoleon tried to unify all of Europe under French domination. He tried to conquer Europe. He was unsuccessful. He ran into some issues. He couldn't invade successfully across the English Channel. The Spanish and French Navy were defeated at Trafalgar. And then he invaded Russia, which was a bad idea. Okay, there's a sad face. All right, so that doesn't mean that Napoleon didn't accomplish some things. So we've got a system of laws known as the Napoleonic Code, which gave France a uniform system of laws that did limit liberty. It promoted order and authority over individual rights, hence, liberty is limited, all right? And freedom of speech and press were restricted. And it also restored slavery in the French colonies. Guess what? Restoring slavery in the French colonies is think back to what we were talking about with Hispaniola and what was going on there. So we're going to see the Haitian Revolution throw off the French colonial administrators and declare its independence, in part as a result of the legacy of Napoleon, the restoration of slavery there. There's going to be a major revolt in Haiti. Okay, so we're going to see the rise of nationalism, feelings of national pride. Deep devotion to one's nation is nationalism. Now, you might think that this is synonymous with patriotism, and in some ways it's similar to patriotism, but nationalism tends to be a very strong devotion to one's nation over all other nations. And so while nationalism can be good, there's plenty of examples where nationalistic types of movements have been very negative. And, as exemplified by the fascist sort of dictatorships that we're going to get in Italy and Germany in the coming decades. So keep that in mind. All right, the Congress of Vienna is a meeting between Great Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden. All right, and they're making decisions in private in the hopes of creating a lasting peace. The most influential representative is Metternich. Okay, he had 3 goals. He wanted to prevent future French aggression by surrounding France with buffer states, strong countries, buffer states and strong countries, basically to keep France pinned down by surrounding it with powerful countries. He wanted to restore the balance of power so that no one country could become too powerful and be a threat. And he wanted to restore the monarchies, bring back the royal families to the throne, which was held before Napoleon's conquests, right? So basically bring back the monarchs. The balance of power doctrine is created. So leaders wanted to weaken France. They didn't want to leave it powerless, all right? If they leave a vacuum, then that's going to allow for somebody else to step in. They could have more problems with France. So they wanted to weaken it, but not destroy it and not leave it powerless, because that could be a problem too. And they wanted to make sure that no country could easily overpower the other. This is one of the most successful peace meetings in history. They managed to keep the peace for 40 years. It's a really long time. We've covered a lot of ground, and very little of it has been peaceful, right? So this is like an early, this is a predecessor of like our modern kind of United Nations meeting of the countries to preserve peace sort of thing, it's a larger effort at diplomacy. Oh, my watch just interrupted me. All right, so anyway, the restoration of the monarchies is part of this. Kings, queens, and princes resume power in their home countries. Some of them are constitutional monarchies. Some are absolutists, absolute rulers. The political map of Europe, the borders, are going to be redrawn, and there will be new political philosophies like liberalism and conservatism. All right, so conservatism is more tradition, right? And liberalism is more, getting away from tradition and, gravitating toward new ideas, okay, in politics. All right, we saw this in Latin America and the Latin American Revolution, so it went too far. So conservative versus liberal. Usually the conservative ideologies, and guys, one thing you need to not do is conflate these conservative and liberal ideals with our modern United States political. Like we're talking about world history right now, and we're talking about, uh, the 17th and 18th century, 19th century. This is similar. Some of these ideas are similar to, what we consider to be conservatives, but don't start thinking in terms of American Republicans and Democrats because they're just not the same. All right. So don't try to apply your contemporary political knowledge to this. Just delete. All right. So usually the conservatives were the wealthy property owners and the nobility. They wanted to protect the traditional monarchies of Europe, whereas the liberals were mostly middle-class business leaders and merchants. And they wanted more power to parliament, okay, to the legislatures. So these guys are more monarchist. These guys are more for the legislatures. These guys are more well-to-do. These guys are more kind of middle and working class. Only educated and landowners would vote under liberal policies. Okay. All right. So all of this that you see in red was ruled by Napoleon, with Spain ruled by Napoleon's family members, right? So same thing with some of these other states. So Napoleon carved out quite a big empire, okay? You can take a look at, see, Sweden and Norway up here, okay, all right. The German Confederation, Germany is a loose collection of states. It's not unified yet. All right. Same thing with Italy. It's not unified. France. Here we go. See how it's surrounded by, stronger states. Okay, that's the idea. They're trying to balance everything out here. So, all right. So the French Revolution left a powerful legacy for world history, and that is a secular society. So a separation of church and state. Remember, Napoleon made himself the head of France. He placed the crown on his head. Separation of church and state. Nationalism. Think French pride, right? And democratic ideas. Because remember, Napoleon kept some of the reforms of the French Revolution. All right. Napoleon's attempt to unify Europe under French domination was not successful, but his legacy lived on. The Congress of Vienna tried to restore Europe as it had been before the French Revolution and Napoleonic conquest. They're trying to bring power back to the kings and queens. So let's look at revolutions and political reform. So remember, nationalism, belief that the people's greatest loyalty should not be to a king or an empire, but to a nation of people who share a common culture and history. It gives people a sense of identity and goals for creating their own land. The growth of nationalism was stimulated by national pride, economic competition, and democratic ideas. Okay. So for a long time, rulers had gained or lost lands for various reasons. All right. We had kingdoms, and they would gain and lose territory. The people in those territories were exchanged back and forth between rulers. In 1815, Europe had several empires with many nationalities. And if you ever take a geography class, you'll learn that there are different types of states. So like some countries are like ours. We're a multinational state. So we have many different people with many different nationalities living within our borders, and we're tied together through common ideals, beliefs, practices, but we're a multicultural, multinational society. Not all countries are like that. So, like some countries are one or very few nationalities. Like a really good example is like Japan. Japan's like 99% ethnic Japanese. So that would be like a nation state. There are also stateless nations too. I don't want to confuse you, okay? But ask me about it if we're in class, and I'll explain to you what it is. It's kind of cool. All right, but like the Kurds would be an example of a stateless nation. Anyway, back on topic. So you have Russians, Austrians, Ottomans living in the same lands. Various nationalist leaders want to unite and win independence for each group. So you're going to see some splintering off of groups. All right. So the rise of nationalism is a powerful force behind European politics during the 19th century. Hey, guess what? It's going to be a powerful force in the 20th century too. It's going to be the reason why we have World War One. It's going to drive World War Two. We're going to start the 20th century with violence because of nationalistic sort of sentiments in the Balkans. We're going to end the 20th century with violence because of some nationalistic kind of tendencies in the Balkans. So it's not just a thing of the past and continues to be an issue to this day. So this leads to the Congress of Vienna. All right. Widespread demands for political rights led to revolutions and legislative actions in Europe. So there's widespread discontent in Europe, especially in Italy and Germany. There were unsuccessful revolutions in 1848 that increased nationalistic tensions. So revolution is going to spread in France, in Italy, in Austria, in Prussia. And even though they don't succeed, Europe is going to be transformed, and the middle class are going to gain power, and they're going to begin to work together. Okay, and once the middle class starts to kind of really work together and band together, usually that's where we get revolutions, we get big sweeping change, okay? Because the middle class is sort of the largest class of people. All right, so the United Kingdom is going to be different than continental Europe for a number of reasons. All right, so, and by the way, we call the period of 1837 to 1901 the Victorian Age after Queen Victoria. And it is a time characterized by expanded political rights through laws. Laws are made that expand political rights. Queen Victoria was a good ruler. She ruled with morals, with duty and honesty and hard work and respect. The middle and working class started to come into their own. They felt more confident. They were more economically empowered. Okay. And so by 1860, Great Britain is transforming its government. It's becoming less of a constitutional monarchy where the king is an actual, or queen is an actual decision maker, and more of a figurehead because parliament is starting to take precedence. And so they're becoming a parliamentary democracy. Remember, parliament is their national legislature, much like Congress is ours. You're going to have executive leaders to replace the monarchs. So, like, for example, in England today, you have parliament that's like our Congress, and they have a prime minister that's like our president. Now, their monarchs are still revered, respected, listened to, but the prime minister is the real government decision maker, and his cabinet, much like our president has a cabinet, his or her cabinet, because unlike the United States, England has had female prime ministers. So they have elected female prime ministers way a long time ago. We're still working toward that, unfortunately. So they're chosen and responsible to the legislature. That's parliament. All right, so you're going to get a working class, or you have a working class, rather, and improvements for the working class are going to come later in the 1800s. You're going to have an industrial revolution that we're going to talk about. The working class is going to become numerous, but they're going to be exploited. They're not going to be treated very nicely. And we're going to talk about that in great detail. But just know, like, factory workers were suffering. They were living in bad conditions and working in bad conditions. The pay was low. The hours were long. And so eventually what you're going to get is labor unions and a labor movement. And this is a global phenomenon. Everywhere you have the Industrial Revolution, you have workers sort of banding together to bargain collectively for better pay, better hours, safer working conditions, etc. So slavery will be illegal in the British Empire in 1807. They're first to abolish the slave trade. So they abolished the slave trade. Now, they did this and were able to do this because they had naval preeminence. So they were able to sort of cut off, for the most part, the slave trade. Now, a couple little caveats here. Just because the slave trade is over doesn't mean slavery is over. And this is a kind of a little quick quiz for you. When is slavery brought to an end in the United States? You probably haven't had via U.S. history yet, but you could answer with one or two things. A lot of times people will say the Emancipation Proclamation, and while that's mostly true, slavery doesn't legally end in the United States until the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. So just because there's a slave trade doesn't mean slavery is going to end. The populations of slaves in the New World have become self-sustaining. And so even though the slave trade is cut off, by the time we get to 1860, there'll be 4.5 million enslaved men, women, and children in the United States. The British are going to use the abolishment of the slave trade as an excuse to imperialize those West African states. Basically, they're going to say, oh, we've got to take these places over to enforce our ban on the slave trade. Parliament banned slavery for the entire British Empire in 1833. And we see the first white abolitionist movements like the Society of Friends emerge in Britain, and eventually those will diffuse to the New World. The Quakers will be the first white abolitionists in the New World. They bring it over with them from Britain. I say white abolitionists because I always like to remind my students that the first abolitionists were the enslaved peoples themselves. They would argue that anyone who is enslaved is by automatically kind of a abolitionist, a person in favor of abolishing slavery. Okay, so let's look at the unification of Italy and Germany, okay, because these two countries are fragmented, but they're going to be pulled together. What do we mean by unification? We mean that they will become one, all right? So not that Italy and Germany will become one, but the states, the various German-speaking states that make up the loose confederation that is Germany will be unified into one country, and the same goes with Italy. And so what does that mean about them before this? Well, there were things about them that tied them together. Culture, language, religion, that made them very similar and made it kind of a natural thing to unify them once the opportunity arose. So nationalism begins to grow in Germany and Italy in the 1800s. Why do you think that is? What is going on that's going to tie all of these states together? Well, let's take a look. So we'll look at the unification of Italy. Italy had many city-states. So think of them as like individual states, right? Napoleon's invasion sparked dreams of a national unity. I know I'm crossing things out, I'm sorry. And the Congress of Vienna ignored that. But unification was possible through efforts of a strong state, which was furthered by, so basically one particular state and that group of states is stronger than the rest, and its leader, if he is ruthless enough, or she is ruthless enough, can tie them all together. What did we learn about earlier this year that began in Italian city-states and then moved into Northern Europe? What phenomena? Can you tell me? All right. There's a shared culture. There's a shared national experience, a shared identity, right? And of course, I'm talking about the Renaissance. Italy by 1829. All right. You can see that there are a number of states, two Sicilies, the Papal States, Florence, Lucca, Parma, etc. Okay. All right. So in 1852, Victor Emmanuel II was the constitutional monarch. So they had a king, but they also had a constitution of Sardinia. And he made somebody named Cavour his prime minister of Sardinia. Remember, that's kind of like a president. And Cavour started to reform Sardinia's economy. His long-term goal in Austrian power in Italy and annex the other Italian provinces. Annex means claim. He wants to tie the provinces together. He's going to try to unify Italy. The new economy is modern. They build railroads. They adopt modern agricultural practices. You need this if you want to industrialize. They trade, they build schools and exchange knowledge. So Italy is modernizing. In 1859, he provokes a war with Austria. Cavour provoked a war with Austria in 1859. And with the help of France, Napoleon III was the leader at the time, Sardinia defeated Austria, and they took an Italian city-state. Nationalists in northern Italy took this chance to overthrow the Austrian rulers, and then they joined Sardinia. See what's happening here? All right, so Cavour unified northern Italy. Remember, he's the prime minister of Sardinia, which was the largest and most powerful Italian state in 1848. And then he uses diplomacy. Diplomacy is basically foreign relations, negotiating with other countries. So he uses diplomacy and alliances, partnerships with other countries to gain control. Napoleon III, Great Britain, and France will help him. Okay. The largest roadblock to claiming northern Italy, to annexing it, is Austria. All right, it controlled the northern Italian provinces. Austria was defeated, though, so Sardinia gained control. Remember that Sardinia had some help. All right, so as Cavour was working in northern Italy, he was secretly working with people in southern Italy. Keep that in mind. All right, moving on. All right, so Giuseppe Garibaldi joined southern Italy to northern Italy. So he wanted to create an Italian republic and accepted aid from Cavour. Okay, so they recruited a force of 1,000 men that they called the Red Shirts. Garibaldi and the Red Shirts are going to take 2 ships south to Sicily, which is southern Italy, or in southern Italy, and they win control and then head back to the mainland. So eventually, they're going to meet Sardinian troops and join forces in this effort to tie the two together. So Italian forces took over the Papal States in 1870. That's this area right here. Okay, and the Papal States, including Rome, become the last to join Italy. So the last to join because France occupied Rome. They were forced to withdraw troops during the Franco-Prussian War. Okay. And so Cavour becomes his advisor to the king of Sardinia. He's one of your main reasons. So he's your O. There's a little, mnemonic device here to help you remember. So O, Cavour unites northern Italy. N, nationalists, Garibaldi joins south with north. He used guerrilla warfare. That's irregular, like hit and run tactics to surprise and harass the enemy because they had a smaller, weaker force, so they couldn't take them head on. Okay. And then E, so we're spelling 1 here. All right. Maybe I should have said that to begin with. And eventually, the Papal States joined Italy in 1870. Papal, as in the Pope, as in His Catholic Majesty. Okay. All right. So why would nationalists like Cavour and Garibaldi want the Italian city-states to become one country? Well, they're stronger together. All right. So the unification of Germany is next. So Germany was the Holy Roman Empire. German-speaking people lived in Prussia, Austrian Habsburg Empire, and other small states. So they had language in common. They had common religious beliefs. What do we know about the Holy Roman Empire? What have we talked about already in terms of religion, wars, major states, enemies that they shared, rulers? We know that there are similarities, okay? So enter Otto von Bismarck, who is the prime minister, there's that term again, of Prussia. He is going to make Germany big, big. Okay, let's take a look. So Otto von Bismarck was a Junker, all right, a conservative landowning noble, all right, like a lord, in England or something like that. So he first served Prussia as a diplomat, all right, King William I made Bismarck prime minister, and then he later becomes chancellor. That's the highest official to a monarch, and his ultimate goal is to increase Prussia's power, not fulfill German nationalist aims of creating a unified German state. So that's not what he's really setting out to do. So he's given approval to rule without consent of parliament and a budget. And nationalism helps tie, remember those feelings of national identity, pride in nation, helps unify Prussia because of the many German people. So they share that commonality. So Bismarck uses the policy of blood and iron to unite German states under Prussian rule. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about realpolitik. And realpolitik is realistic politics based on the needs of the states, not service to the religion or something like that. It's realistic and based on the needs of the state. Power, rules of principles. So went against Prussia's he went against Prussia's legislature and used other funds for a military buildup. And then he's going to lead Prussia in 3 wars. And this is going to really go a long way in increasing Prussia's, all around the world, people will view the Prussian military as sort of the standard for land forces. And Prussian military officers as the most well-trained and knowledgeable. So the Prussians are going to gain a reputation as being very adept, prestigious, and powerful. And that is going to generate a lot of pride and a lot of German unity. Okay, so we got the Franco-Prussian War, all right, between Prussia and France. Napoleon III declares war on Prussia after some provocation. Bismarck was hoping for this. Prussian forces were victorious, okay, over the French. So Prussian forces defeated the French, and Napoleon III had to surrender very, very quickly in just a few weeks. It's a national humiliation for the French, but a moment of national pride for the Prussians, for Germans. So northern and southern German princes persuaded William I of Prussia to accept the title of Kaiser William I. And so in January of 1871, the Second Reich is created. All right, the Second Empire. If that sounds familiar, it probably should. What is the Third Reich? The Third Reich was the third sort of German empire created under the rule of Adolf Hitler. All right, so there's a new government. Bismarck drafts a constitution. He creates a bicameral, 2-house legislature, and ultimately, real power remained in the hands of the emperor and his chancellor. Okay, so von Bismarck led Prussia in unification of Germany through war by appealing to nationalist feelings. All right, actions were seen as an example of realpolitik. Basically, in the end, if you're doing it to achieve and then hold on to power, it's justified. So the ends justify the means when it comes to realpolitik. It's a good way to remember it. Okay, so Bismarck used war in German nationalism. All right, remember he's the prime minister of Prussia. Great issues of the day will be decided, he says, by blood and iron. He's a military leader, all right? He's unifying Prussia through military success. I do whatever it takes. That's realpolitik. So, and remember, we're spelling big here. So big B, Bismarck used war and German nationalism. I do whatever it takes, as in realpolitik. If you're willing to do anything to get what you want, you believe in realpolitik. Then what sort of things might you do? Right? So if I'm willing to, if I'm willing to do whatever if I'm willing to do anything to get what I want, I might do some not so good things to get what I want, I guess was what I'm driving at here. But that's okay, because if I get power and hold on to it, then it's justified. Not really. I believe in realpolitik, so I'll do whatever it takes to get what I want. Okay. Germany unified after the Franco-Prussian War, 1870. For G. So what did the Holy Roman Empire and therefore the Prussians hate? Basically, they hated their adversaries. They hated, you know, France especially, and they were eager to expand. They were eager to carve out their own territory. I'm scribbling. Okay. Why would a nationalist like Bismarck want the German states to become big and unified? Italy and Germany became nation states long after the rest of Europe. All right. Go back and answer this question. What do you think? They're more powerful when they're united. Okay. All right, that makes sense. All right, that concludes our nationalism, Congress of Vienna, unification of Italy and Germany lecture. Make sure you guys do those guided notes. Make sure you do the discussion. Make sure you answer the chapter question.